Hello and welcome. If you don't know me, my name is Mike Cornwell, and this is a video that I'm calling Grafting 101. And this video, it's really geared towards anybody who's getting ready to do a workshop with me or a grafting event. And also, if you're just kind of interested in grafting and you'd like to know more, you've never done it before, this is a great video for you to get started with. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do like actual grafting in the video. I'm not going to show you any of that kind of stuff. I'm going to show you much more of the high level stuff. And what I'm intending for you to be able to pull away is, I've got kind of three things. Number one, you're going to leave the video knowing generally about grafting. You're going to know enough to be able to jump in and actually start doing grafting. The second thing is you're going to leave with a high level of confidence that you can do it. And the third thing is I'm going to leave you with kind of like the one bit of wisdom from having done so many grafting, like what is the one thing that's most important? And you're going to leave the video with that. So let's get into it and let's get started. I'm going to start with the confidence building. And what you need to know is I'm coming in front of you right now as a person who has probably around 10,000 grafts under their belt. So everything that I'm telling you now, it's not like kind of from an academic standpoint. It will maybe look academic. I've got a whiteboard. I'm going to put some stuff on here, but it doesn't come from academic. It comes from 100% experience. And I'm very open with my successes and my challenges and stuff like that. And so when you're watching this video, just know that you're receiving like real experience, like information that comes directly from experience. The second thing I wanted to tell you was, you should definitely have a much higher level of confidence when you're using the right tools and the right processes. Now, I've done, I've actually recorded a full-length video on like in-depth of how to graft and made it available for sale. But we're not going to go anywhere near that. That's a 2-hour long, specific video on it. But what you need to know is, what we're going to talk about in this video and what we're going to do in any of our grafting workshops, the tools and the processes are doing most of the difficult work. I very specifically chose certain kinds of tools so that we can do them very fast, we can do them very clean, and we can do them very accurately. And the majority of the difficulty that most people experience from grafting comes from the tool usage. Oftentimes, I used to give workshops and I would show people how to do this stuff by hand. So we take a knife and we're, cutting the wood and to like go and fit all the wood, and people would cut themselves. They would show me their pieces of wood and I'm looking at them like, that's never going to work. And they found out just how difficult it is, that if you're using the wrong tools, it's hard. But if you're using the right tools, it's really easy. So we'll go over that kind of super briefly. And the last thing that I wanted to impart you with is just to know the kind of grafting that we're going to be doing at any of these workshops, and the kind of grafting that I would recommend is really easy. There's only a handful of things you need to get right, and one of which is the time of the year, and that's controlled by everybody else out there who has the materials, and you're a recipient of the materials, so you don't have to worry about that one. So you got to get that right. And then number two, you got to focus during that time span doing the grafting. But just the main things, like we're going to be grafting apple trees and cherries here in a couple weeks, and those are really easy to graft. In the past, when I was doing, let's say, lower numbers, like let's say 200 in a sitting, I was easily getting over 90% take rates. I'd say right now, grafting about 700 in a season, I'm probably sitting around 80%, maybe 85%. It kind of depends. There's a lot of complexity that goes involved with the plant being successful, almost none of which is in your hands. So long story short, what I'm trying to say is like the kind of grafting we're doing is really easy. You got to get the few things right, and it does all the work after that. A lot of which I'm not going to get into, like nursery management and things like that. It's not really about grafting, but how you run a nursery will definitely determine how well your grafts do. You might think it's from your grafting work, but it's really not. It's how you're running a nursery. So let's get in how exactly grafting works. And something that you need to know right out of the gate is there's a lot of ways to do grafting. And there's kind of two main ways, like two kind of major categories. And one, it's called dormant grafting. And that's what we're going to be doing. And then another kind, which, you might call it not dormant, but we'll call it budding. So there's dormant and there's bud grafting. Dormant grafting happens when all of the plant materials are kind of asleep. They're not leafed out, or if they are, that's like very specific kinds of ones that you're doing it on. But everything's asleep. So it's wintertime and a temperate climate. So like right now, we're filming this in February. All the trees are dormant. We're getting ready to get in, take a shipment of these plants in, and they're all asleep, so to say. They're still alive, but they're asleep. Budding happens, on the other hand, like the far opposite end of the year, usually in August and kind of temperate climates, or year-round in tropical climates where the plant is alive and it's popped out, it's fully leafed out, and oftentimes it's like actively growing. And so you're cutting like a bud off and you're putting it on into another plant. We're not going to be doing that. And these two types of grafting, although they're sort of the fundamentals are the same, they're just so fundamentally different from what you do and your experience with the plants and how you have to handle things and how you have to get things right. The tools that you use, they're just could not be more different. We're only going to be doing dormant grafting, and everything I'm talking about now is pretty much only going to be talking about dormant grafting. Okay, so now let's get into it. What I want to do is I first want to do kind of like, give you kind of like the definitions of the main parts of the plant and or the tools that you need in order to do this dormant grafting correctly. So the first thing is there is scion, and then there is a rootstock. Okay. These are kind of the two main words that you're going to discover about grafting. And people are talking about, oh, what scion is it? What rootstocks are you using? If you enter any of the kind of fruit growing world, people will focus on these. Now, there is a lot of focus. Like I can't underestimate, or I can't undersell you how much people focus on these two things. But all you need to know about for grafting is that the scion is the fruiting part of the wood. It's the kind of tree that you want to replicate. And a rootstock, it's kind of like the host. And all you're really doing with grafting is you're taking a scion and you're attaching it to a rootstock. I'm going to draw a bunch of pictures of these things, but just kind of work with me here. The scion attaches to the rootstock, and then you've got a fully completed tree. A scion is a stick. It's just like a little tiny stick. In some cases, it's like literally a little tiny stick. And then a rootstock, it's literally, usually it's, depending on exactly how you're doing your grafting, it's just a little tiny tree. These are its roots right here. This is, that coming out. It might have a little bit of things coming off here. Some little, and that's it. That's what a rootstock is. And the scion looks like that. Now, at least when it's cut. But, a scion is really just like a little branch. So, you just got like a little stick that you then cut up and attach. We'll show more of that here in a moment. Okay. So now we got the scion and the rootstock. Other things that you need to know about. There's grafting tape. There is also, you need nursery tags. I'm trying to think if there's really anything else that we need to go over. So grafting tape, all it is it's, material, looks like tape. And depending on the material that you're using, it's either like a plastic wrap, like a saran wrap, or it's more like a waxy material in the case of parafilm. Now, I use parafilm personally. It's a natural material. It breaks down over time. It's breathable, so there's an air exchange that happens to keep things kind of healthy. I use parafoam. Other people use saran wrap, plastic. It's super cheap, like really, really, really cheap, probably 10 times cheaper than the parafoam, but you have to cut it off and some other things like that. But it's really any kind of tape. Now, back in the day, people used tons of different materials. You could probably use clay. And all this grafting tape does is it acts like a Band-Aid around the plant. And so, I don't see why you couldn't actually just kind of cover it in clay and you have kind of the same effect. All you're doing is you're just protecting the wound that you create, and that's just grafting tape. So nursery tags, usually most of them, they kind of look like this. They got kind of like a little tag here, and then it's got kind of like a little curl end. It kind of curls around. Let's see. And then kind of goes over the top. And these are super important when you're doing grafting. And the reason is you need the plant name. More often than not, and in almost every single scenario, you really care about what scion and rootstock you have going on. And the cases of our workshops, like the one coming up in 2 weeks, I think we're grafting about 50 varieties of apples and something like 20 varieties of cherries. Once you start talking about those numbers of varieties, your marking material is some of the most important things that you could possibly have. So between having, good scion, good rootstocks, having like a good grafting tape and good marking materials goes a long way. So that's those kind of things. Now let's actually talk about grafting. Now that you know about a little bit about scion and rootstock, don't want to introduce these terms too fast, without you kind of knowing what's generally the things that we're going to talk about. So now we're going to talk about each one of those really in depth. So a scion is it's a branch from a tree. So you've got a tree here, you got an existing tree, and when it goes dormant, there's all these sticks that kind of make branches that make the tree, right? So when the tree goes dormant, now I'm going to erase all the leaves. It's got all these branches left. The part that is the scion is all the way on the tips here. It is the newest growth of the tree. It's all these little tiny tips on the end. And you'll know when you go and you take a look at a tree, it's really any tree, but when you go and you take a look at a tree, it grows on the outside. It grows all along, but all the newest tips, or the tips, they're all the newest parts of the wood. And so scion is collected from an existing tree that you want the fruit of, and you want to replicate and create new versions of that. So that's where the scion comes from. A rootstock is actually a tree itself, depending on what kind it is, right? Another term that I should throw out there is the word cultivar. A cultivar is like a specific named plant that people are clonally reproducing. And so that's what grafting is. It's a clonal reproduction of existing materials. And so both the scion and the rootstock. So let me go ahead and draw kind of what a rootstock kind of looks like. And then let's say we cut off our scion here. We have a little twig. Okay. Make it more twiggy. Okay. Once we, these two, unless this tree came from a seed, and that's called a seedling, it is also a clonal reproduction of another cultivar. So these have a name. So this might be, you might be familiar with Red Delicious, Golden Delicious. This has a name of itself as well if you're using, specific varieties of rootstock. And an example would be Geneva, which is up in New York. The university there of, slipping my mind at the moment, they've made a bunch of different rootstocks. And so these have names. And so you'll see like, not G11, but yeah, G11. You might see like G41 or G969. And so that represents the name of this. Certainly not the most delicious name. Over here, you got like Red Delicious. I don't know, Black Limber Twig. This list goes on and 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 on. I want to say in the next coming grafting workshop, we're probably grafting to, I think, 5 different rootstocks. The cherries, we have 2 different ones. So there's a bunch of different varieties. And you end up creating a unique combination with these. So if I were to take, let's get rid of Red Delicious because I would never graft one of those. And let's just do Red Rebel. I think we will actually be grafting some of that. Excuse me. So you would combine, Red Rebel to G11 or G41 or G969, and you would create a tree that is the combination of the 2. Now the theory is, and it is theoretical, it is observable, but it's also anti-observable, that the rootstock itself is normally controlling things like health on the plant, vigor of the plant, i.e. like how big it grows and how fast it grows. So this is normally controlled by the rootstock, but people's, I'll say people all the time, your mileage will vary. So these, like, for example, G11 is like a super dwarfing rootstock. So in theory, that tree would only get, like yay big, especially with a little bit of pruning. If you put certain cultivars on it, it will grow it'll double, triple the size of some other ones. And so, what's the name of it? Honeycrisp is notoriously slow growing. So you put a Honeycrisp on G11 and you're going to get a tiny tree. Whereas if you put Dula Beauty, which is an apple from, I guess it's from North Carolina. It's been a while since I've looked in the history of it. It is super vigorous, and you're going to get a much larger tree. So the thinking of, oh, well, the rootstock is just going to like set perfectly what I'm going to get is just not true. It's just fundamentally not true. So if you hear anybody say that, or just not caveat that, then you need to take pause, because the combination of these two, especially with the kinds of plants that you or I would be growing, or that we would want to be growing, has no one really knows what the results of that are going to be. That's where we come in, and we're going to go and graft them, and we're going to grow them out. So let's talk about how to actually combine these together. So what you do to create a tree is you got your rootstock. And you go way down here. You got your roots down here. Okay. Then it comes up. And what you do is you cut off the top of the rootstock. So this part goes away. And then now you have a nice fresh cut here. So I'm going to draw kind of like a little circle. Okay. So now you've cut that and you've got a fresh cut. What you need to do is you need to attach this plant material to the scion, and you make the same exact but opposite cut on the other side. And now you've got, this is your scion here. And it's got these buds come up. This kind of looks a lot like a cherry. And these buds need to face up. They go up. If they go down, it doesn't work. If they go up, then it can work. And what you do is you combine these two together. Now, when you take a cross section, like if we were to cut the tree in half long ways like this, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. You're going to see kind of a centerpiece here. Then all the way on the end, you're going to see this. Let me use some other colors. Actually, I've got brown, so it'd be a little bit easier if I use brown. Okay, so we got brown. Then we've got green. Now you can also see, depending if you've got a red fleshed apple, this will also be red colored. That's kind of a cool thing. It's like a little hint that you're going to get a red colored apple on the inside. You can also see some other kind of lines here, so I'll draw them in. Okay. And each one of those are kind of like little rings that kind of go around it. Now, on the outside of every single tree, they have the bark, that's the brown part, and then they've got the green part, which is the cambium. So if you ever hear the word cambium, what they're talking about is this green part. Now, this is a very non-scientific kind of statement I'm getting ready to make, but the best way I think of when you think about a tree and what it is the green part is the actual living tree. The brown part really isn't the tree. It's more like wood. And the green part it's the actual plant itself, and it rides on the outside of this wood. And so I kind of consider it like the roots have like the life force, and it sends this material through these active, growing, actively alive channels. And so what we're doing during a dormant grafting is these channels are basically inactive. All the life is, you could say it's in the roots, but funnily enough, that scion, I mean, it's alive. Is it going to be able to grow its own tree? No. But once this thing comes out of dormancy, it's going to start sending fluid through all this outside. And it's actually how the tree expands. So it puts the fluid in there and it goes up. Now, what we're doing when we're grafting, let me kind of put a cut here. This right here is our root stock down here. And then this is our scion. All we're doing is we're connecting these channels together. We're connecting them. That way, when the material flows through the plant down here, when it comes up from the roots and comes up, it will go into our top plant. I guess I could technically draw it over here, right? So we've got our cambium, and this layer can be really thin. I mean, really thin. You go and you kind of cut open the plant, and it might be hard to see, but it's there. It's on the outside. So it's really important, and we're going to stress this later. It's really important that the layers, the green layers, come into contact. And here's kind of the interesting thing about grafting. You don't actually need both of them to come into contact like that. You need at least one. So let's say this is a very common situation. We don't have a scion that's perfectly the same size as our rootstock. We have it, and it's a little bit smaller. So we got our little circle here. We got our scion coming up here. We're going to connect this stick to that one, but you'll notice both sides can't connect. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to connect this one side, and this side will not connect. Now what happens, again, what happens is the outside will start to fill with liquid, and this side will fill up. And you got to think kind of three-dimensionally, like there's kind of this rounded part. Those parts will fill with fluid, and it will go around and into the plant, the other side up here. Now this part may be dead, that like little corner, but it eventually flows around, and as this tree grows, it will actually eventually connect completely. So all we're doing is just connecting cambium. That's it. That is all grafting is. Now, I'm going to go over a couple different grafts, some of which we're not going to do at these workshops, just to give you kind of an understanding. Like now that you know that all it is just attaching these two pieces of wood, and you want to do it in the dormant season, and you want this green layer called the cambium to connect at least on one side. If your top one is too big, you actually can't use it. At least I've never used it. I've heard don't try it. Could be worth trying, but I have kind of low beliefs it's going to work. Normally when you have a tree where the top is becoming larger and like thicker than the bottom, you normally got a problem. So I'm not too surprised by that. But what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you that all grafting is, and like the techniques of grafting, they just relate to how you connect the cambium. That's it. That's all there is to it. So I'm going to draw what's called a cleft graft. Now, I don't normally do these, but this is one of these ones that you could take today and go out there and go do your grafting. I used to do these long ago, but I don't do them anymore, at least not frequently. And so, let's see. Okay, got that. Let me draw like a top angle too. Okay. So what a cleft graft is it's kind of this V-shaped graft. And I'm drawing it a little on the exaggerated side so you can kind of see. Actually, I should get rid of this brown because the brown doesn't exist. Okay, I draw that cambium just for like continuity. Okay, so this is the rootstock here in a cleft graft. Let me put the name up here. Cleft graft. Okay, so all you're trying to do is, again, you're trying to touch the cambium layers. Now, let me get there's green in here, and technically there's green on the outside of this. All you're doing is you're making a wedge, and you're putting it in here. And you got your sign right there. And what happens is the cambium on the inside of this wedge is like this. And so if you imagine kind of three-dimensionally, kind of looks like a green hamburger, you basically cut down the middle and you spread the plant apart. And then you put it down in like a wedge, like this. It goes right in here, and it makes it look like it's kind of, it's kind of round, but it probably is more like this. Got kind of this round stick that's going in there, and that's a cleft graft. How it works is that the cambium layers on this inside here are connecting on two sides. Let me see if I can draw this three-dimensionally. Might be helpful. Okay, then you got this right here. And then you got another one. This is going to be hard. Oh, I've got this upside down. This is going to be too hard to do three-dimensionally. But I think you get the point here. So that's all a cleft graft is. Now, another kind of graft, which is the kind that we do the most, almost exclusively, is called a whip and tongue. And all the whip and tongue is it's a kind of cutting that you create a whip and a tongue inside the whip. And so the way that this works is if you're, again, looking on that side, you basically have your rootstock and you cut it at an angle. Just like that. So instead of cutting it flat like you would the cleft graft, you cut it at an angle. The next thing you do is you cut the scion at the same angle. And then on kind of the higher up piece, the lower on this other one, you make a cut on the inside. Actually, let me do this a little better. It'd be like that. And then what you do is you do the opposite cut on the rootstock. So you're making the cuts. You haven't fitted it together yet. Let me get rid of this. And your scion, or your cambium, is in this line right here. Now, you then fit them together, and what happens makes this really nice connectivity. It's kind of like this. And inside of here, you've got this other stick that comes out like that. Now, what makes this graft so nice is because these fit together. Like you can see, like when you make the cut, it makes kind of like just an individual line. But when you shove them together, it ends up spreading them apart. And it makes the graft like really tight together. And so it holds together. The problem with the cleft graft is you put it in there and there's not really anything to hold it. And so it just kind of falls over. So it's a little more difficult to wrap. So on a cleft graft or on a whip and tongue, you actually end up having all of this connectivity for the cambium. You have lots and lots and lots of surface area for that cambium to make a contact. And so I really like these, and the tools that I have make these grafts really easy. What makes this really, really, really hard to do is if you don't have a tool to make that cut and to make this cut. This cut right here, when you're using a knife, which I don't think I see one in here anymore, it's super hard. Like you got to hold the wood just right, and you got to do this kind of like motion and stuff like that. Like people try to go away from them, and this is a super hard cut to make for somebody who is not really skilled with a knife and skilled at making these cuts. This back cut here can get a little tricky too, because if you're not doing it at like the right angle, you can just cut the back of the wood off. Super easy to do. And you'll go and you'll try making the cut, and then all of a sudden it's like not at the right angle. These two, ideally, for this this graft to work, they have to be like the exact same opposite angles. Like this kind of nice graft only happens when these slants are exactly the same. If one is like here, you can just take a look here. Imagine trying to put together something that looks like this. It just doesn't work. Or, you know, your top one is like really super steep compared to your other one. It just is not going to fit. And so you've got to make these lines exactly the same. This is why good tooling helps dramatically. It's kind of non-trivial difference. I'm going to show you one more. And this is kind of a fun one. This is something you can do on an existing tree that a lot of people don't realize is, let's say you've got like a full-size tree, or at least like nearly full size, and you've got like a reasonably large branch coming off. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of zoom in on that section right there. This is how you can do what's called top working a tree. And so you've got your branch, tons of rings. What we're going to do is a chip graft. Or some people call it a bark graft. We'll call it a bark graft. Okay. This one for existing trees only, where you have a much larger piece of wood, you know, an arm that's like that big, and then you got your stick, which is maybe the size of your finger. Again, you're still using, as with all the scion, you're using with new wood. You're not just taking some old wood and sticking on. It's with new wood. And all you do is you make an incision. And you can make multiple grafts on a single one. So I'm just going to show you one. You make an incision going down the plant. You basically kind of slice into the bark, and then you kind of peel it back ever so gently. You definitely don't want to break this. So you kind of peel it back just a little bit. Okay. So you kind of peel that away. There's certain knives, budding knives work really great for this. And you can kind of use, there's like a not sharp side. You can just kind of like lift it, move it away. When you do that, this very thin layer, it's all the way on the end, you can see it. It will expose, guess what? Cambium. Because remember, on the other side of this bark, there's a cambium layer. Okay? And so when you're moving just the bark, there's many layers in this tree, just the bark, you will see a green layer behind it. Then you get your scion, and you actually prepare it like you would a like a really long cleft graft. You would never do a cleft graft quite like this, but you would create this kind of pick shape piece of wood or wedge shape, like a really tall wedge. You got your cambium on either side of this, and then you turn it and then you fit it in top. And so what you end up with is a piece that comes up and out like that. And inside of here, you have your graft. You got it wedged in there, and then you can kind of see there's a little bit of green on either side or whatever. And that's what a cleft graft or a bark graft looks like. Okay. So the big pull away that I really want to emphasize here is it's all about this green layer and about making kind of shapes in the wood for the scion and fitting it in such a ways that it connects with the cambium. Making sure to have things like the buds going up, right? So those buds are facing upwards. And that's it. So these grafts are relatively easy to do. Again, if you got the right tools to be able to peel back. And these can make some nice trees. We've done some around here. And that's pretty much all that I have. The one thing that I could leave with you parting, like the number one thing to get grafting correct is the cambium. The cambium is the grafting process. All grafting is, like just all it is the different kind of ways that you would connect these cambiums together. And there are pros and cons to all the different ways of doing them. So long as your tree connects together at the cambium and starts to leaf out at the top, it's correct. And so what makes depends on the circumstance, which one of these types you might want to do. We personally prefer doing whip and tongues. And while they're very difficult to do by hand when you're using like a hand knife, if you're using the right tools, they're just so much easier. We're talking 100, almost 1,000 times easier than doing them by hand. You might do 100 grafts by hand and have very few take if you're doing it with a hand knife, and you might have nearly 100 takes with using the right tools. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. If you like this video, let me know. If there's any other aspects of grafting that you'd like to know a little bit more about, let me know. And if you can make it to one of our grafting events, we definitely need grafters. This is like our first year kind of reaching out for help. And we could probably do it on our own, but we're looking long term. We've got this super ambitious project here locally that we're trying to get off the ground, and it's going to require thousands and thousands and thousands of grafted trees. We can't just go buy these trees. That's just not how this works. We have to graft them. Even the people who could make the trees for what we are doing, they couldn't make them in quantities enough that we will actually need, and especially in the diversity and stuff like that. They just don't do that. No one does this. So we're in, super need of people here locally who, want to do grafting. And especially if, you're between the ages of 18 and 29 and you want to partake in our grafting, we're super interested in that. But, that's all that I've got. Thank you and good luck on all your grafting.